Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, I'm going to talk about how and when to water trees and shrubs. It's the middle of the summer now, and I thought it'd be a good time to go over this. I'm going to be talking about Encore Azaleas specifically because I have some that have been in the ground for a couple years and some that have been in the ground for like a year and some that are very newly planted. And I thought it'd be good to go over how I treat plants differently based on how long they've been in the ground. I think that's an important component of how to water. I'll also go over how to check and see if things need water, what time of day I'm watering, and the frequency with which I'm watering. Two very important things. One is I have to assume that you've planted it properly, okay? Planted the plant properly. All of these azaleas and anything you see in my yard is mounded up just a little bit above the original grade. So when you plant things, try and make sure that you can still see the crown of the plant above the grade of the soil. And the reason for that is when we're talking about watering plants, I've actually seen more plants killed by loving them to death being overwatered than underwatered. If we raise them up like this, we kind of take that away. And it would be very difficult for me to overwater anything in this yard based on the way that I had originally planted them. So keep that in mind. Number two is we really need the ground mulched, okay? And I'm gonna show you an example of why right this second. So this is a weeping cherry, which is in a mulched bed right here. And if I turn my water hose on it right here, I've got a lot of pressure because I have an irrigation system that doesn't go through the pressure regulator, but I want you to pay attention to that water around the base of this tree in this mulched area. Look what's happening. The mulch is not just great at retaining moisture, it's also great at actually allowing the moisture into the ground. It's not allowing any runoff here. Look how much water I'm giving this tree, and it's still taking it up. The ground is still taking it up, okay? Now let's move over here to a spot where I had dug out for a path that I haven't done yet, and watch how the water is just running away. And that's the difference between a mulch space and a non-mulch space. I'm in the southeast United States, and we get thunderstorms on and off throughout the summer, and they're hit and miss. We can go 2 and 3 weeks at a time, sometimes without rain, and then be just drown every afternoon for a week. That's typically how our rain goes here. Most of our older established plants can tolerate that 2 or 3 week gap in there. It's not ideal, but the plants survive it just fine without a lot of additional water. Obviously, those of you who are in high deserts or have seasonal rainfall, meaning you get all your water in the wintertime and not in the summer, you have to water. In the summertime, you're definitely watering, and you're probably best to put in some sort of drip system so it's on a timer and you know that you're watering. Those of us who have to kind of think about watering where we get rainfall, but we can have gaps in between it. That's the main thing that I'm addressing in this video. Like I say, older established plants, the only time I'm giving them water is when they're in flower or when they're leafing out, or if we've gone a long period of time where it's abnormally dry. So you can probably see these white wedding hydrangeas back here behind me. This is the second season they've been in the ground back here. Those hydrangea paniculatas are extremely drought tolerant. I probably, in general, would not lose them in my area, like I say, where we get regular rainfall if I didn't water them. But while they're in bloom like this, and when they were coming into bloom, I was definitely giving them some additional water. So they put on this big performance. It not only gives me more bigger, better flowers, it also makes them last a lot longer by keeping them moist. So keep that in mind. So that's really older established plants. I'm just giving them water when they're putting on their big show. Okay, newer plants, completely different. What I'm doing on these is I'm going around, I'm digging around the base of them with my finger an inch or so down. I'm seeing if the soil's dry, and if the soil's dry, I'm dragging a water hose to it and I'm watering it just like I showed you with that weeping cherry over there. I want to absolutely thoroughly saturate the space. I don't want to sit here and water for 3 seconds and move to the next one, because then the very next day I'm going to have to do the same thing. I need to water thoroughly through the root ball. Let me show you a root ball. So here's 2 Encore Azaleas, and like most container shrubs in the United States, they are grown in some sort of bark mix, and the bark is used because it drains well. It holds a little bit of moisture, but it drains really, really well, and especially growing plants in the southeast where we're susceptible to hurricanes and tropical storms, and like I say, lots and lots of thunderstorms. we have to have we have to have something in the container that drains pretty well. It'll hold some moisture, but like I say, it drains. Well, what that means for you when you're putting something in the ground is that the soil around where the roots are as you're putting it in the ground, the water passes through it pretty easy, passes through that column pretty easily. Here's a autumn sunburst azalea, that Encore Azalea, that I haven't watered in a couple days on purpose. And you can see this root ball here, you know, how porous this material is and how chunky the material is that's being used in these containers. And this is typical of all, you know, container shrubs, like I say, everywhere. But you can see that's actually kind of hard to re-wet. Once this is kind of dried out like this, it takes a couple times watering it to re-wet it, or you have to really thoroughly, you know, saturate it. Here's one right here that I had watered toward the end of yesterday, and it's, you know, got a more consistent color, and you know, you can see there's no dry pockets or anything like that. But you can see when you put something in the ground that's like this right here, that's 12 inches deep, 10 to 12 inches deep like that, if you go and superficially water, you know, for 3 or 4 or 5 seconds, there's no possibility that you're going to re-wet all of that dry bark. So keep that in mind. You really need to sit here and hold the water hose over this for an extended period of time and water it thoroughly and less frequently. So this is 3 autumn lily Encore Azaleas right here. I'm going to go ahead and water these. This is the second season that they've been in the ground. Last year I definitely watered them more consistently than I've watered them this year, or checked them more. I don't know that I watered them anymore, but I checked them a little bit more. Again, I'm going to put my finger, you know, down near the base of these things and get to the bottom of my mulch and see if it's moist or not. If it's moist, I'm going to leave them alone. It hasn't rained here in several days, and we've been in the mid to upper 90s. So I'm going to go ahead and water these. And again, I'm just going to hold the water hose here. You see how I'm watering over the top of that plant? There's a lot of talk about, you know, not watering the foliage, and, you know, that's fine. If we can avoid it, you know, let's put the hose down here if you can. Obviously that is better. The main thing about the foliage staying wet is if the plants were crammed in here really, really tightly, that could be an issue where the leaves are continuing to stay wet, you know, between, you know, overnight and that kind of thing. But if they're open like they are right now, and it's during the day, that foliage is going to dry out fast enough that it's not going to cause a problem. But you see how thoroughly I'm watering this? I know that there's bark underneath the ground, you know, for that first year or two, until it breaks down and the roots really spread out in the soil. Now the other thing is the roots should be right out here to the edge of the plant, and so keep that in mind. It's not right here just in the center of the plant, but it's the entire drip zone. The drip zone is, you know, out to the edges of the leaves. Okay, when to water is another hotly debated thing, and frequently you'll see on, you know, people writing all the time to water in the morning, water in the morning. That's a great advice for watering turf, okay? Because in your turf you have thatch down underneath the blades that can hold water in place, and overnight you can end up with some pretty serious problems on those. On the shrubs, like I say, they have enough space around them that I just don't worry about them. And guess when plants grow? They grow at night. And so I don't want them to go into the night wilted and dry, you know, because I'm worried about whether or not to water them at 7 o'clock. Almost all the rain in the summertime in the southeast United States falls between 5 in the afternoon and 8 or 9 at night anyway. And so that's when they're getting water from the sky. So it's no different than me doing it at that time. So I water them when they need water. That's the answer. Okay, and I don't want them to go to sleep at night under drought stress, because like I say, that's when they do their growing. That's when they're going to start opening flowers. That's when they're going to really put on, you know, build up. They use the sun, they collect the sun's energy all day, collect carbon dioxide all day, and then they assemble all those things at night. Okay, you see how thoroughly I've watered these 3 plants while I've been talking. I'm going to move to the next one. So here are 2 autumn fire Encore Azaleas, and this is the second season that they've been in this space. This particular space is a little bit different than where those autumn lilies were over there. Those autumn lilies are sitting out there in open space. There's nothing around them. There's nothing competing with them. They've been able to, you know, I give them water when they need, you know, when they've dried out for the last year and a half, and they've responded beautifully and grown quite a bit. These autumn fires here have not grown as much. partly because I haven't given them quite enough water because they're competing with this tree. This oak here has been in the ground for over 20 years, and it's very good at stealing nutrients. If this azalea and that tree had kind of grown up together, they would be totally fine. But when you're planting new plants into an established bed with an old tree, know that you're going to have to give them additional water. More water than you're going to have to give other things. Again, still mound them up though, because the amount of water that I'm having to give them, I don't want to end up, like I say, I don't want to end up drowning them just like anything else. But again, I'm coming over here, I'm checking around the base, I'm digging down, you know, an inch and a half. These are actually kind of moist. They're not too bad, but I'm just going to show you just for, I can't really overwater, like I told you, because I got them mounded up enough here. But I saturate the area very, very thoroughly. The mulch is a little thinner here, and so the water's running off some. The area over there was absorbing it. I need to remulch this space. If the water's running away like that, move to the next plant and water it until the water starts running away from it. And then by the time you come back around after you do 2 or 3 plants, the water will have soaked into the first one. And so I'll hit this one 2 or 3 times. If it's in a runoff situation like that, the soil's too compact or the mulch is too thin, that kind of thing. And I'll just go back and forth, but I'm still going to end up somewhere in that 30 seconds, you know, on each plant with the amount of pressure I have. When I'm planting new plants, if let's say I was planting 5 or 6 plants here, I'll actually get the first one in the ground and I'll bring the hose over to it and I'll barely turn it on like this, and I'll lay it at the base of the one that I've already put in the ground while I plant the next one. And so this one, this space is really being thoroughly saturated. And then when I get the second one in the ground, I'll move the hose over to it just like that. These are some autumn lilac Encore Azaleas that I actually just put in this spring, and they're in an elevated bed. And so, you know, the fact that they're newly planted this year and the fact that this soil is going to drain really, really well, better than anything else in my yard, this is something you have to think about. To give these some additional water, you know, especially in this first year. Again, they're elevated. Even on this mound, I left them up just a little bit above the grade. And again, this is the same thing. I just built this little mound of soil up here, and so the soil's still kind of loose and it's receptive to the water moving through it pretty easily. So I don't have a lot of runoff in this space. But these 5, again, same thing. I'm just watering them thoroughly. We can water them from the bottom. If you're concerned about it, like I say, during the day like this, it doesn't bother me at all. The foliage is gonna dry off. It's like the least of my concerns in the watering process is whether or not I'm getting the foliage wet. If you can, again, stick the hose underneath it, but they're gonna dry out pretty quickly. The sun's just coming up over my house now. Okay, container plants are another issue entirely. I showed you how much that container mix can dry out and how thorough, I mean, just you can dry out so much that it's really kind of hard to re-wet it. And so any container mix is going to be like that. Once they get dry, they're difficult to re-wet. So when you're watering any container, and I'll set this kind of here in the middle so that you can see, make sure that you're watering all the way around the container, not just one spot, you know, down through the middle, but whatever size your container is, water it edge to edge all the way around, whether it's a square, whether it's a circle. Keep in mind the water is going to drop through that container mix almost straight down. There's not going to be a lot of wicking left or right in that container mix, and so you need to make sure that you thoroughly wet, or you're going to end up with dry pockets, and there won't be roots in those dry pockets. So that's pretty much how I address everything when I'm watering. These autumn lilacs were newly planted this year, and I'm checking them very frequently, watering them thoroughly and infrequently. That's one of the keys. We want to water them very deep, and we want to let them dry out between. We don't. I've dug plants out of the ground 2 and 3 years after they've been planted on landscape jobs in the past, and they hadn't rooted out at all because the person had just either been giving them a little bit of water at the time, or they were planted up near the house and maybe the roof water was giving them too much water and they were planted too deep. They just never root out. So we want to water them, we want to keep them in good shape, but we want to deny them just enough to have them actually go out into the surrounding soil and root in and establish. Second year plants like those autumn lilies on the other side of the driveway, I hadn't checked them in a week, and it's been in the mid 90s, but they were dry at that point, and I watered them thoroughly. They probably could have gone a little bit longer. They weren't really showing any signs of drought stress. Once something's in the ground, you know, 3 or 4 years, less and less water. And like I say, the watering that I do at that point is typically going to be when they're leafing out in the spring, when they're flowering, when they're, you know, sometimes in the fall in our area in the southeast, it can be really dry. We're in Hurricane Alley, but if we don't get one, September and October are actually 2 of our driest months. So I'm actually, I do think about watering in the fall as well, as things are starting to go dormant. And that's pretty much it. Water thoroughly and infrequently. Make sure your plants aren't going to sleep at night in drought stress, because that is when they put on their growth. If you're concerned about keeping the foliage too wet, or your plants were really crowded, try to get underneath them and water from underneath. Otherwise, with these well-spaced plants like this, watering during the day, they're going to dry out before the sun goes down this evening, and I'm just not that worried about that. So thank you very much for watching this video, and ask any questions you have that I may have missed in this video about watering trees and shrubs.